Now we're going to look at the body of the article. So coming down to the introduction, this is where the body of the article starts. In the introduction of this article, the authors start out by explaining personality disorders, what they are, and then they narrow it down to the severe personality disorders, and more specifically give information about those, because these are the personality disorders that they're discussing in the article. So here they're giving a lot of background information to help the reader understand these particular personality disorders. And then they're giving the problem again, the adverse effects of these disorders on the personal and family life of the patients. And they're talking about other researchers and what other researchers have found about these disorders. Now, you might be used to seeing a citation when other researchers are mentioned. Instead, what they're doing is putting a number, and each one of these numbers are referring to another researcher who's done study on this topic. Here we have the name with the number, so we can verify what I'm talking about. So if we look here at this name, Motoy et al., number 7, we can look at the end of the article, scrolling down to the end of the article, number 7, Motoy, and it gives all of the other names of the researchers, the name of their article, the journal that it was published in, the date, the volume number, the issue number, and the page numbers. So each one of these numbers that are in parentheses inside of this article is actually a citation, a parenthetical citation. They're just doing it a little bit different way. Instead of putting the year, they're putting a number, and then you get all of the rest of the information at the end. So we can see a lot of these numbers put here because the authors are talking about a lot of other studies that were done on this topic. Here's another one. So all of these studies are discussing this topic, and when we have a whole bunch of information about this topic being discussed, then what it's called is a literature review. Generally, the literature review is found in the introduction, usually the second half of the introduction, and it always comes before the methods. And the author is using other people's studies to help the reader understand the topic and help the reader understand what's already been researched about this topic. That would be the literature review. You know you're looking at a literature review when you're looking at a whole bunch of other studies that were done related to this topic. And then coming down, we get to the last part of the introduction here. Here we can see that there's still the literature review going on. And then the very last paragraph of the introduction is usually the paragraph that gives the aim or purpose of the study again. And we can see here that the authors have put it in as the very last sentence of the introduction. So after they've talked about all of these other studies that have been done, they say, therefore, with respect to the above mentioned statements, and also due to the limited scope of studies on this subject, which sometimes had contradicting results, the present study was conducted to assess the role of brain behavioral activation and inhibition systems in predation of severe personality disorders. So they're claiming that the other studies had a limited scope. They didn't cover everything as much as needs to be done. Okay, so due to the limited scope of studies on this subject, and also the fact that they sometimes had contradicting results. So they're showing that, see, our study is necessary. The present study is important because they're trying to make up for these problems, the limited scope, the contradicting results. They're trying to show here that their study is important, that they have an important purpose. They're going to fill in a gap in the research. So we find the aim of the study at the end of the introduction. Just as we found it, generally speaking, you'll find it somewhere at the beginning of the abstract. Next section, we have the methods. In the methods section, they're going to talk about the participants. So here, once again, they're listing the participants. They're listing the different groups that they divided the participants into. And they're going to talk about what they did with the participants. They're going to, of course, give a lot more details in this section than they did in the abstract. And so they continue here to talk about the different tests that they gave the participants, and more specifically, what kind of questions that they asked. And then that leads us to the next section, which here they call the findings. Now, if you remember, if you look at the abstract doesn't call them the findings. After the methods, it's called the results. The results is the same thing as the findings. So here they list it as results, but when you look in the body of the paper, it's listed as findings. It's important to know that those two words mean the same thing. So in the findings, we have some tables. We have table 1. If you were asked a question, what is table 1? What kind of information does it give us? Then you would need to write the title of the table. Basically, the title of the table tells us what information is found in this table. So the information that is found is the mean and standard deviation of brain behavioral systems and severe personality disorders. It gives in the findings section here, it gives several other tables and gives a lot of statistical information, data that was gathered. The meaning of all of this information is hard to decipher when you look at all these different details, but it's very helpful when we look in the discussion section. So looking in the discussion section, we can see that the results, here it says the correlation coefficient results showed that, okay, now we know that there's going to be some meaning. What did it show us? It showed us that there was a positive relationship between brain behavioral systems and BPD, PPD, and SPD. So after we find this out, we find out that the regression analysis also showed that BPD prediction based on both BIS and BAS, brain behavioral systems, was significant. So here's two different results. And then we find out that this was, meaning these results, this was consistent with the findings of previous studies. Which previous studies? Well, these numbers here are listed in the reference list. So these particular previous studies, okay? So the 8, 9, 10, 14, and 15 in the reference list, which indicated a positive relationship between BPD and both BIS and BAS. So when we say that these results are consistent with these findings, it means that they both matched. They were both similar results. Also, this result was consistent with Ross et al., number 13 on the list, and Harmon Jones, number 20 on the list, and so forth. So it's talking about the results, and it's talking about how the results match up with other people's studies. And they discuss it for a long time, and they talk about a lot of the results and a lot of other people's studies. Okay, if we go down to the end of the discussion, generally speaking, at the very end of the discussion, we're going to find the limitations. So here we have limitations. The present study had some limitations whose removal in future studies might lead to more comprehensive results. Some of the limitations were as follows. So what do we mean by limitations? What we mean is that in some way or another, this study could have been done better. That if we do the study better, if you don't have these limitations in the future, you'll get a better study. So here, some of the limitations were as follows. The role of gender, educational level, and marital status of the participants were not considered, whose effects can be examined individually in future studies. So what they're saying is next time someone does this study, they should examine gender, educational level, and marital status and see if that makes any difference. And then they also recommend, it's also recommended that further studies be conducted on bigger clinical samples. So basically they're saying their sample was a bit small. Remember that their sample only had, if we look back here in the methods, they only had 30 paranoid patients, 30 borderline, and 20 schizotypal. So altogether, they only had 80 people. So they're recommending here that further studies be conducted on bigger clinical samples. Obviously, they mean more than just 80 people. So in this particular list of limitations, we have two. We have this, it's recommended that further studies be on bigger samples, and here that these different roles be examined. And so these are two different limitations that are listed in this study. Next, we have a small section here called the conclusion. Now, you don't always find in an academic paper, you're not always going to find a section called the conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion is simply put at the end of the discussion, and it's a part of the discussion section. In this case, the author decided to make its own small section, but you won't always find that. And then at the very end here is a very tiny section called Acknowledgments. And this is simply the authors thanking the people that helped them with this study. And that leads us to the end of this lesson.